It is 3 minutes after 10. A very good morning indeed to you. Quite a lot to get through today. Why do I say that at the top of the show? There's a lot to get through. Actually, that's not true. The days I really earn my money is when there isn't any news. But that hasn't been the case since about 2015. Hey, it's funny, isn't it? Be careful what you wish for, kids. There's the days when there was no news. I said, oh my God, I wish there was something going on. I wish things weren't so I wish the waters weren't so calm. Now, for the last 7 years, too much news, too much going on, too much turmoil, too much misery, too much horror. And today is no different. There's a very, very, very strange development in the sorry saga of Shamima Begum, which we will probably talk about in the second hour of the programme. It's hard to think of a more remarkable addition to that story. Well, whatever you may think about that story, however you may feel about a groomed teenage girl being deprived of her citizenship because her groomers were so successful, her British citizenship. She's brown, obviously. It would never happen to a white girl. But the full story of how she ended up in the clutches of ISIS in Syria is breathtaking. And the latest development today is going to knock your socks off if you haven't heard it already. I am drawn to the story because we've got to do apparently I did use the word consequentially correctly. Thank you. It's very important that you keep an eye on me when I indulge my sesquipedalian tendencies. I am drawn to the tale of food banks today, and it's a pretty bleak question. What happens when they run out? Do you remember it's not that long ago, the Mail on Sunday was sending journalists to food banks to try to get food in order to prove how easy it was and how unnecessary and unneeded they were. And then you sort of fast forward a couple of years to Rees-Mogg, the alleged Christian, describing them as uplifting. And now we're looking at a situation where the rising costs of food, the rising cost of living, and the pressures of energy bills, among other things, mean that food banks are not only worried about whether they're going to be able to heat their premises, they're also worried about whether they're going to have any food to give to their clients. What happens when they run out? That's a question for the ages. Although, if we take a day off from the cost of living, because occasionally we will have to, and this, in case you're wondering how the programme works, this is an idea that has just popped into my head as I glance to my right and see Boris Johnson's ludicrous fizzog bloviating endlessly into the ether on a television screen in the studio. It's been bugging me, this farewell tour that we touched on yesterday. The front page of one newspaper, well, I say newspaper, we should probably have a little bit of sympathy for Daily Express journalists today because they're going on strike in protest against low wages after, of course, being ordered by their management to write countless stories about how people who go on strike to protest against low wages are militant scumbags who deserve none of our sympathy whatsoever. But the front page of the Daily Express today, farewell, I'm proud of the things we did. It's featuring another picture of Boris Johnson's ludicrous fizzog. I have been bugged all morning by what this was reminding me of. I just couldn't put my finger on it because as he talks about his legacy and how he's proud of delivering on his promises and he wants his successor to grab the torch and run with it, it was the fact that people will go along with it that was part of what was bothering me, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. And I just remembered, this is the British version of Donald Trump claiming that he won the election. It literally is. It's exactly the same. Boris Johnson claiming that he did a bang-up job as Prime Minister. And, of course, what makes it identical to the Trump lie is the number of people, right-wing people in this country, who will be going along with it. Some because they believe it, and some because their sort of cultish delusion has reached medical levels now. But there it is. There is the British big lie, the big lie of Donald Trump, the idea that he won the election against Joe Biden, still being promoted, still being inflated, still being supported by people who know it's a lie, up to and including him quite possibly. Boris Johnson now doing exactly the same, claiming that his premiership has been a great success and something to be proud of. He's delivered on all his promises, which would include, no doubt, those 40 hospitals. I mean, to be fair to the fella, I don't know what your new hospital's like, but mine's amazing. It's a whiz-bang, fantastic. There's no hospitals. There was never even going to be any hospitals. Some of those 40 hospitals were just going to be sort of refurbishments and paint jobs. But he's delivered on all his promises. He got all the big calls right. And Donald Trump won the last election in the United States of America. So we may talk about that in the final hour. I will allow you to examine my somewhat cocky conclusion. You can tell me, no, James, it's nothing like the big lie in America. Boris Johnson really has delivered on all his promises. Don't mention the hospitals. Or indeed anything else. So we may have a look at that in the final hour if we can't if we can't muster up whatever it is we need to return our attention to food banks. Nice to see the rest of the media catching up with you when it comes to small businesses. Savers from 400% energy hikes. Small firms plead with trust. Fears of mass closures. Twitter yesterday began to bubble with pub closures. There was a pub down in Bournemouth that closed, a pub up in Yorkshire that closed simply on the spot. The minute they're given the new estimates of what their bills are going to be, that's it. Game is over. Game is over. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. What are we going to talk about first? We're going to talk about this story here. Can we get the... You know what we want. You know what we want? Do you know what we want? Prove it. Go on.
Woke Watch.
An entire hour of Woke Watch today because the front page, and you know how much it hurts me to report on these matters, and I have been recently quite complimentary about the Daily Telegraph's news values. But today is one of those days where the comment pages have, by a process of diabolical osmosis, infiltrated the news pages. This is not a news story. This is an opinion piece masquerading as a news story. Get back to basics, woke police told.
Woke Watch.
Police are today told to focus on the basics by Priti Patel as a report finds that the public feel officers are distracted from solving crime by woke causes. Really? A report, you say? Has it been conducted by academics or by completely independent peer-reviewed organisations? A university, perhaps? No, it's a think tank. And you don't even need to Google it to find out whether or not it's one of the think tanks that is, shall we say, rather secretive about who funds them. The sentiment is understood to be backed by the Home Secretary. Wow! What an absolute result! Imagine commissioning a report that by an astonishing congregation of coincidence manages not only to be backed by the Home Secretary, it completely reflects her own feelings, established and in place and well known before the report was even commissioned, from an organisation that doesn't tell you who pays its staff wages, but also completely at one with the editorial opinion of the Daily Telegraph. That's amazing. That's incredible. Imagine if you commissioned a report which you wanted, but obviously you've got no influence over these matters. You can't, for example, influence what questions the public are asked or, who it is that wants the fight. By a complete coincidence, an organisation called the Policy Exchange, coming soon to a programme near you without any mention of where their funding comes from, an organisation called the Policy Exchange, a right-wing free market organisation, yada, 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 that has no doubt been silent or complimentary as police cuts were inflicted upon this country, turns around and astonishingly, miraculously, coincidentally commissions a report that happens to fit entirely with Priti Patel's politics and the Daily Telegraph's editorial policy. You'll be telling me next that the fella who runs the Policy Exchange has got a column in a Rupert Murdoch newspaper. But that would be too ridiculous, wouldn't it? 11 minutes after 10 is the time. Priti's views, this is a government source, are that police should be focusing on getting the basics of policing right, on traditional policing and making our streets safer. Right, we're looking, as Alan Johnson reminded Nick Ferrari this morning, we're looking at a politician, we're looking at a government that cut police numbers since 2010 by a fifth, by about 20%. The number is usually, I think, around the 20,000 mark. Johnson has pledged to recruit 20,000 extra officers, which is going to be tricky given the staff shortages in just about every sector in the country. The criminal justice system is falling apart at the seams because of underfunding, under-resourcing and lack of interest. As Dominic Raab, no doubt, twiddles his thumbs on his sun lounger, courts are falling apart, literally. I'm talking about the fibre. I'm talking about water pouring down the walls of one courtroom, I think in Snaresbrook. I could be wrong. Don't quote me. A barrister sent me a message last week and I may have got the location wrong. You're looking at police unable to investigate burglaries because there are simply not enough of them. You're looking at police undertaking roles traditionally believed to be more medical or social than criminal. They're essentially doing the work of mental health intervention teams. An awful amount of their time is doing what would once have been done by social workers. And as a consequence, our burglaries are going uninvestigated and things like online sexual abuse are going almost unchecked. It's an absolute national catastrophe. It's a national tragedy, and it is an almost direct consequence of 12 years of Conservative government, which hates spending money on public services that rich people don't really need. Because if you're rich enough, for example, to fund a secretly funded think tank, then you're unlikely to be mugged. There are some terrible crimes involving expensive watches, but the idea of your house being robbed 3 times in a year because the local drug dealers need to get a fix doesn't happen in Belgravia, doesn't happen in Mayfair, doesn't happen in Chelsea, doesn't happen in Chiswick. That's why they hate the spending. That's why the numbers come down. The Tories do the bidding of their donors. The Tories do their bidding of their shills, their client journalists, the media owners, the think tanks that won't tell you who pays their wages. Crime figures come down. The public, understandably, might start asking some uncomfortable questions. Theresa May actually stood up in front of the Police Federation and denied that there was any link between police numbers and crime. In which case, why have a police force at all, Mrs May? Seriously, if there's no link between police numbers and crime figures, why have any police figures at all? If it's some other voodoo that you undertake in order to keep crime figures down, and it's got nothing to do with how many police officers there are, let's get rid of all of them. So how the hell, lads? Sit down. Come on, everyone come down to Tufton Street. We've got a big meeting. We've got a big conflab going on. How are we going to convince the plebs that the policies we have called for, because they suit the interests of our tax-avoiding plutocrat sponsors, how are we going to convince the plebs that police numbers have absolutely nothing to do with crime figures? The fact that crime figures are rocketing, we can't even blame it all on Sadiq Khan because the numbers in Birmingham now are higher than they are in London, and the mayor in Birmingham is a Tory. How the hell are we going to convince the plebs that cutting police, slicing back the criminal justice system, turning the legal profession into a ramshackle, clinging on by its fingernails operation? How the hell are we going to convince them that it's not entirely our fault? It's not the fault of right-wing politicians, client journalists and think tank shills, free market vampires who hate the idea of money being spent on things that they don't personally need, like, safe cladding on the side of buildings in North Kensington. How are we going to do it? Well, let's tell them that the reason why crimes aren't being solved is because some police officers sometimes dance at public festivals. Come on, they're not going to swallow that. Well, I think you'll find they are. I mean, I can name at least 5 columnists who will actually write articles claiming that crime figures are linked to one officer being photographed or filmed doing the can-can at a carnival. No. Yes. Well, okay. Let's give it a go. What about pride? I mean, what's pride? Why is pride a problem? There's a lot of homophobia around. I think you guys underestimate it. If we can find a police officer wearing a helmet that perhaps is in pride colours, what? Just one officer? One helmet? Yep, literally just one helmet. We'll get it in the Mail, we'll get it in the Express, we'll get it in the Telegraph. By tea time today, 44% of your Uncle Keith's Facebook friends will think that the reason why their burglaries aren't being investigated is because a police officer in Poplar was once photographed in a multicoloured helmet. Oh, come off it. They're not that stupid. Lads, we persuaded them to vote for Brexit. Oh, yeah? Well, let's give it a go. Let's give it a go. The reason why crimes are going uninvestigated, crimes are going unsolved, police morale is rock bottom, and criminality is rising in the United Kingdom is because some police officers wear pride badges, some take the knee at public events, and occasionally one is photographed dancing at a street festival. And according to this research today, 4 out of 10 members of the public agree. I've never done this as a topic before, but I'm going to do it today. And I appreciate, I may in fact be alienating the people about whom we are talking, but I'm beginning to learn to live with that. How could anybody be so stupid? Seriously, you just think about it. As a potential victim of crime or a victim of crime, how can you be so stupid? How can your head be so far up your backside that you think the reason why the police can't do their job properly in this country at the moment is because occasionally they have a bit of a boogie at a street festival or one of them wears a multicoloured helmet? How can you be that stupid? How can anybody be that stupid? I don't believe anybody is born that stupid. I believe people have this level of stupidity inflicted upon them. How can anybody end up believing in the United Kingdom, a relatively well-educated population, that the reason why a police service that has been decimated by a government that has seen its numbers slashed by about a fifth is not doing as good a job as it used to do because of the occasional copper having a bit of a boogie and 3 or 4 of them taking the knee at a Black Lives Matter protest march. How does that happen? 0345 6060 973. Rob's a border officer. There aren't enough of us even to look through suitcases at ports at the moment, James. It's a free-for-all. No customs stops at all at regional ports. Portsmouth, Southampton, Bristol, Cardiff. Jacob Rees-Mogg had to literally call off customs checks because of how much money it was going to cost. Customs checks that he campaigned to bring in under the control our borders element of Brexit. 10:18 is the time. It's not a generous question. It's not a pleasant question. It's not a kind question, but it's an important question. How can anybody in a country whose police service has been decimated by its government end up believing that the reason why crimes aren't being investigated or solved is because of woke policing? 0345 6060 973. And if I'm talking about you, ring up and argue with me or ring up and say sorry. James, I cannot believe I fell for this crud. I'm so sorry. And tell me who you blame. Who is it that you would blame for the fact that you looked at crime figures, you looked at a government that has reduced them by about 20%, and you thought, I know what the problem is here. It's that bloke over there doing the lambada. 0345 6060 973. How does it work? It's 10:19. 21 minutes after 10. It explains so much, you know, as you're looking at the cost of living crisis, threatening to undermine your household while the CEOs of the top 100 FTSE companies in this country saw their wage go up by 39% over the last 12 months. And you sit there thinking, how does this happen? A large part of the answer to that question is the thing I've been hitting you over the head with for the last few years. You have newspapers pursuing an agenda, but that's not enough. You need secretly funded think tanks to dress up the biases and bigotries of those agendas as news or as research or as reports. They end up in the newspapers, politicians respond to them, and when the consequences of these policies are actually felt, whether it's cost of living or Brexit or crime figures, then they have to find a scapegoat for the reality of their political choices. Their political choices are made to protect wealth. They do not care if substandard cladding is stuck on the side of a tower block in North Kensington called Grenfell. They do not care because that doesn't affect them. Shareholders make more money the cheaper the goods that are used. Shareholders make more money the lower the wages that are paid. You get a think tank to dress up bigotry and bias as research. You publish it in the newspapers, you right-wing politicians go along with it, and then when the chickens come home to roost, you need a scapegoat, you need someone to blame. What is it today? Why are crime figures so high? Why are policing numbers so low? Political choices, political choices, political choices. But we can't tell them the truth, so we're going to blame it on woke policing. It's the first time I've really felt the insidious nature of this woke rhetoric. We have a lot of fun with it. We laugh about it. We poke it. This is the first time I've really felt how dangerous it is. Because they're taking the consequences of conservative government choices taken over 12 years, inflated, inflamed, and in many ways inspired by secretly funded think tanks and horribly biased media, and they're claiming that the results of those choices are caused by the odd copper doing the lambada at a street festival or taking the knee at a Black Lives Matter march. And the question I've got for you today is, how can anybody be stupid enough to fall for it? 0345 6060 973. Colin's in Newcastle. Colin, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I'm a retired policeman, so I've obviously got a vested interest in this.
We've all got a vested interest in it. Some of us have a more vested interest than others.
Exactly. Just to add to the point, can I just say, what you said is perfectly correct. It's been highlighted by the HMI and other senior police officers, former and standing. The other thing,
except the former police officer that you get to write this report. There'll be one of them. I don't even need to check. They're going to get an ex-copper, an ex-chief inspector, or something like that, who miraculously, probably not even that rank, probably just a DCI, who miraculously has served up a report which fits entirely the biases and prejudices of the people that are going to put it on the front page and hopefully bring it into government.
And And the one they usually use, I used to work with him, and he was a very good cop at one stage. But there you are. I just want to add, don't forget that the cops are getting hurt themselves. Assaults on police are rocketing.
Yes.
The reason they're in special measures is not because they're in contact, just they haven't got cops to deal with the crimes. They haven't got cops to deal with the response times to you, which is worrying if they haven't got any bodies on the ground. But my point I like to make is just the same old narrative they use with it's like the NHS. We know the 100,000 vacancies there. Who do they blame? The doctors and nurses. With the education, it's always these teachers. With the government itself, it's always civil servants. And now with policing, it's the police officers. And I call it the minion effect. They always want to blame the minions because it takes away or diverts attention away from the government, who fail to do the job, which is to get a strategy of getting people inside doing their jobs, more doctors, more nurses, more police officers, teachers. And it's easier to blame the people doing the job than actually the people responsible. Because why have you got all these departments? Why have you got all these ministers? What are they doing?
It's rarely this clear. It's rarely, 23,500. The most recent numbers I can find are from December 2019, when the GMB reckoned that 23,500 police staff jobs had been lost in England and Wales alone since 2010. Johnson is marching around the country talking about how he wants to recruit 20,000 extra officers. It's actually surreal. That's like a card trick. It's don't look over here, look over there, don't look over here, look over there. So the same people who've reduced it by 20,000 are now boasting about how they're going to increase it by 20,000. Not mentioning the former Home Secretary who became Prime Minister, who claimed that there was no link between numbers and crime. Everybody knows there is. That's one of the stupidest political inventions I can ever remember. But it's so clear what's going on. What the hell are we going to do to cover up the fact that we caused this problem? Answer, woke nonsense. I can't believe how many people fall for it. Can you?
No, I can believe, because a lot of people believe these right-wing media, that they believe everything they're told.
But if my house got turned over last night, and whatever coppers are available eventually come round, and they have a look, and I'm a bit frustrated that they don't seem to have much hope of catching it. At what point does your brain get switched off so you think, oh well, the reason why they're not going to actually catch the burglar from my house is because a bloke in Preston wearing a multicoloured helmet?
I know. James, can I add to your further a bit now? Today, right this moment today, Boris Johnson he's going to see some police recruits. He's doing the usual PR stunt with some police recruits, and he's going to a violent reduction unit, and he's going to get his photo up. So I'm sure by tomorrow it'll be in the Daily Mail or whatever, Telegraph. But that's ironic because, like I said, the Conservative Party was the party of law and order, and most police officers now believe it's the party of crime and disorder. Having Theresa May and the Conservatives in charge, it was like having a mafia run the police in this country. It's like Theresa May was equivalent of Al Capone. She's done so much damage to policing, and she's done so much
Why? She wouldn't. This is the bit that slightly confuses me, and I'm often criticised for being too kind and generous to these politicians. But why? I can't believe they did it knowingly. It's like when Johnson cut fire stations, and I used to say, but he lives here. What if his house catches fire? And part of the answer to that is, if you live in a wealthy part of town, then you're considerably, measurably, demonstrably less likely to be a victim of death by fire, because standards are higher, safety, health and safety, red tape that they're also against. There's loads more red tape in wealthier areas that protects us from those sort of tragedies and problems. But what was Theresa May thinking in a generous analysis, Colin, in a generous analysis?
I don't know. I mean, it's widely known that she hates the police.
Save money. You can't accuse her of hating the police. No one. I mean, it's not like she's a black 15-year-old boy who gets stopped and searched 14 times a week, is it? I mean, why would she hate the police?
I have no idea. You'd have to ask. Next time she comes and ask her.
Yeah, don't hold your breath.
No one's ever going to ask it. No one's ever asked the question. But I still feel that most Conservative voters, they have no use for public services because, look, they send their kids to private schools, so they don't care about education. They go private healthcare, so
the numbers don't support that, mate. You've got about 9% of the country doing private education, and even less doing private health. So it doesn't stand up. And they don't have private police forces. These people are furious about coppers wearing helmets or taking the knee.
Yes, but
they don't have private health or private education. They're just silly.
I was going to get to the point. Most of they live in the best parts of the country. They live in the best parts of.
What about the Red Wall, Colin?
Hey?
What about the Red Wall? That was supposed to be all about people living in some of the poorest parts of the country, convinced that the Conservatives were on their side.
Well, the part. Obviously, I'm up north now. Those Red Wall parts And I wouldn't call
This
them the
woke
poorest
stuff
area.
plays a lot better in your part of the world than it does in the leafy suburbs where I hang out, and where actually the demographics are changing. They're not traditional nailed-on conservative constituencies anymore. But I mean, lots of food for thought. How do actual coppers feel about this? If you're there, underfunded, understaffed, under-resourced, desperately pleading for more numbers, more bodies, and the newspapers and the politicians are saying, "Oh yes, you're all so woke." They're blaming you, or at least a tiny proportion of you who get caught doing a lambada at a street festival or wearing a multicoloured hat at a pride march. It beggars belief. But the question of how it works is, of course, a question for the ages. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. The time is 10:30. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. What is woke policing? Have a go at that. Because it's been bandied around now all the time. The examples that they have can be counted on the fingers of one hand. What is it? What is it? And explain to me how it can possibly have had an impact on burglary investigation success rates. 0345. It's as if they're asking you to believe that a bloke is on a Blues and Twos 999 call to a burglary, and then he decides to stop on the way and take the knee at a Black Lives Matter protest or start doing the lambada at a street festival. He's on his way to an actual crime scene, and instead of going there and investigating it, he decides to, I don't know, put on a multicoloured helmet and talk about how the police used to actually be charged with investigating homosexuals and criminalising and imprisoning them, but now the world has changed. It's probably quite a good use of the occasional copper's time to point out that the world has changed. We're a very different organisation now. But what is woke policing, and how the hell can people be falling for it as a rhetorical device to let the government off the consequences of their own political choices? It's 10:31. Lottie Morley is here with your headlines. 10:35 is the time. I'm surprised how cross I am today because, theoretically, it's not the most enraging issue in front of us. But underpinning an awful lot of our time together for the last 6 years has been the question of what are they going to set fire to next? What are they going to wreck next? They've succeeded on Brexit, this curious alliance of secretly funded think tanks, incredibly biased right-wing media, sycophantic politicians, client journalists, shills from lobby groups. They set fire to the membership of the European Union. You can see how stupid that was, how insane that was, in order to allow a tiny number of people make a huge amount of money. What are they going to set fire to next? And I thought the NHS would be at the front of the queue. It probably still is. But actually now I'm looking at the police service. I'm looking at law and order. I'm looking at criminal justice. I'm looking at barristers going on strike because when you break down the number of hours they do on a given case, some of them are on less than the national living wage. And it's all a direct result of political choices driven by the cabal that I've just described. So what are they going to break next? And that's why I get cross, because I know how successful it is. You remember the people that used to ring me up and say, well, we've got to make our own laws. And I'd say, well, what laws is it that you are unhappy about? And they didn't have a clue. They were primed to the point of ringing a national radio station to insist that their lives were beset and held back by laws made in Brussels by a parliament that included a significant contingent of British politicians, but which they had been persuaded was somehow an obstacle to their own personal advancement. And you would say to them, remembering that they are as convinced of this view as anyone. I mean, to stick your head above the parapet in the pub is one thing. To ring a national radio station is quite another. I'm absolutely certain of it. And then one tiny little question. What are you talking about? What laws? And they would fall apart. Like the cheapest of cheap suits. And it's happening again now. What is woke policing? No one can tell you. OK, let's find an example from this Daily Telegraph report. Last week, police officers in Lincolnshire faced criticism after being shown on social media performing the Macarena at a Pride event. OK, what else were they going to do at a Pride event? If they weren't doing the Macarena, what would they have been doing? Would they have been investigating online child sexual abuse on their phones while policing a Pride? Or would they just have been standing there not doing the Macarena? What would they have been doing? Would they have been investigating burglaries if their job that day was to be providing police security at a Pride event? If their job that day was crowd control at a Pride event, if they hadn't been doing, what would you be okay with them doing? A Sudoku? It's horrible to see the British public being taken for complete mugs yet again with something at risk that's even more precious than membership of the biggest single market in the world. This is our criminal justice system. This is the police. This is the courts. But by inflating this and you please give me a ring and tell me what woke policing is, if you think you can make even half a decent fist of somehow linking it to crime figures in a way that 23,500 bodies being removed from the police staff is not the primary factor, then I will bite your arm off. It sounds like James has run out of compassion for the conned. It's about time too, I reckon, says Dave. No, I hate it. To see the British people, 4 out of 10 of them, swallowing this woke policing crud, it breaks my heart. Because what do you lose? When a significant part of the population are persuaded to believe lies, you lose everything. John's in Billericay. John, what do you reckon?
James, I just want to say, as someone who spent 9 years as a police officer in London on the front line responding to emergency calls, there is no such thing as woke policing.
How dare you? Last week, police officers in Lincolnshire faced criticism after being shown on social media performing the Macarena at a Pride event. Ha, 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 ha! Stick that in your pipe and smoke it.
And it's like you just said, do people actually genuinely believe if those officers weren't on aid at the Pride event that they would be out not catching burglars? They were there policing the Pride event. A song came on, they had a little dance, they're entitled to do that. It's not like they were basically out patrolling and then decided to go to Pride to do the Macarena. Yet people believe it because, unfortunately, organisations like The Telegraph, with their headlines, want to try and convince people that the reason there is such a big issue at the moment where if you phone 999 because your house is being broken into and the controller says to you, I'm sorry, Mr. O'Brien, we've got no units to send to you because we've got no one available, people like The Telegraph want people to believe that the reason there's no officers there is because they're out doing the Macarena.
I'm told that we're mispronouncing Macarena. Apparently, I don't know how it's supposed.
That's my fault.
Come on, no, it's Macarena. Keith says Macarena, and he's a DJ. I don't know how often he plays the Macarena, but we shall address. I mean, how does it work, John? Because I'm frustrated as an observer and arguably a chronicler of this malaise. You, in a way, are a victim for it. When you were on the job, the idea that your lot are too busy doing the Macarena, that's why they're not investigating murders or not. It's so stupid. How could anybody actually believe it?
I genuinely wish I knew the answer to that question because, I think people are more intelligent than we give them credit for, Like, for example, when I was on response team, if I would go out and arrest someone, I would then have to spend 8 hours doing the paperwork for that. That's 8 hours of not being out on patrol. But it seems like the mainstream media want the public to believe that, after arresting someone, I then go out and find groups to dance with or go out and take the knee. It's complete rubbish.
I quite like that as well. I'm not gay, but I do remember going to Pride one year and seeing the double-decker bus, the open-top bus with very old LGBT people on it, and actually being hit in the heart by the knowledge that the men in particular on that bus would have been put in prison at one point in their life for pursuing their natural love lives, for pursuing their sex lives. And it would have been your predecessors in uniform who would have been handcuffing them and chucking them in the back of a van. So the idea that the police might just actually reach out a bit at a Pride event to say, hey, we're here too. This is good.
Exactly. It's that unity, it's that unity of the police and, like the LGBTQ community. The fact that, as a police officer, I policed Pride events. I used to love going to those events. I mean, I'm heterosexual, not that's got anything to do with it, but it was such a friendly atmosphere.
It was more fun than it's more fun than an EDL march. But I take your point. Maybe that's the problem. They're not woke police on an EDL march. If one of them were to occasionally sidle up to a protester and say, "Oh yeah, all right, yeah," but woke police at a Pride march. Oh, well, anyway. Thank you, John. The mystery, perhaps, of how people fall for it, and it can't all be the media. And I don't know anymore. I used to be convinced that people in my line of work knew exactly what they were doing when they stoked you up to vote to leave the European Union or to think that single mothers with flat-screen televisions were the reason why your wages were low, or that kids coming over the channel in dinghies were the reason why your daughter couldn't get a council flat. I used to think that they were making it up as they went along. But I don't know anymore. I think perhaps they don't think about it. It's as if there's a gear you don't need. When you see 4 out of 10 of the public falling for this, and you've got a column to write or you've got a spiel to, but you just think, okay, well, they'll go for that. It's like you've got hungry dogs. You're not going to check the provenance of the food that you're giving them. It might actually be bad for them. It doesn't. You're just going to chuck them. There you go, have that. We'll chomp that up. 4 out of 10 of the British public think that woke policing is a problem. It so obviously isn't. And I guess what amazes people like me and John and others is that the people selling you this crud are exactly the same people that sold you Brexit, that sold you Theresa May, that sold you austerity, that sold you David Cameron, that sold you Boris Johnson and are now selling you Liz Truss. It's the same people selling you the same product and then blaming it on God knows who when it all goes belly up. On this occasion, blaming it on woke policing. Does anyone want to have a go at telling me what that actually is? Because if I was on a Pride march and there's a police officer standing there, if he was doing the Macarena or twiddling his thumbs, I'd choose the Macarena every time. Kaz is in Bristol. Kaz, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm a woke trans woman. I'm much loved by Jacob Rees-Mogg and the Tory leadership candidates. But yeah, I actually welcome the Macarena scene in local prides because we know that LGBT plus hate crimes are on the increase. What this is all about is about distraction. It's about distraction by right-wing Tory politicians, right-wing think tanks, just trying to distract from the fact that police numbers are down due to austerity, and the Tories are basically unable to get them back up, and just trying to distract from what's actually
from
going on in the
reality.
country.
Actually, the best way to distract from reality is with something that's not real, something that's invented. A fake threat, a fake enemy, the wolf at the town gates that isn't even there. What I don't quite get, and I don't know whether, for once perhaps, I'm not privileged enough to understand this. I think my own privilege sometimes prevents me from understanding some issues, but rich people need the police too. Rich people need criminal justice too. So how can the interests of the very rich be served by attacking the institutions that theoretically they would need as well?
I think they're trying to basically trying to look after their own interests. So by distracting from the real issues in the country today, crimes are on the increase, rape crimes are not being solved, LGBT plus hate crimes are up. These are the
It doesn't hit them, does it? There's an insulation in place. There is an increase in private police forces, but more pertinently, the crime figures, if you do them by postcode, you're going to see the poorest parts of town being by far the most beset by crime. And
this is why they want to basically make it about people, police officers doing the Macarena. They want to...
Macarena, Kaz!
Macarena, I do
Flipping heck.
apologise, I will get that correct. Can you actually do it, James?
Yeah. No, of course I can't do it. I can't even say it. What, do you want to have a go? Do you want to be the first of the day to have a go at telling me what woke policing actually is?
Woke policing, from my point of view, is policing, by the people, for the people. There's the LGBT plus community are out there. We want to see the police supporting events, pride events. And if a police officer joined in with the hokey cokey at a St George's Day celebration, would that be woke? I wouldn't be described as woke because it'd be described as patriotic. Funny that, isn't it? Yeah, it's the hokey cokey. It's either woke or it's not woke. It doesn't matter where it is or what it's done. It's the hokey cokey, it's the Macarena, it's the lambada, it's the can-can. Is it woke or is it not woke? Depends, James. Depends how many gay people or black people there are in the crowd. If there's lots of gay people and black people in the crowd, then it's woke. I mean, come on. You can see it now, right? Mark in Sheffield can. James, I for one would like to give a heartfelt apology because I've been taken in by all of this. I heard myself saying to the radio yesterday that the police dancing at the Macarena was an absolute disgrace. I've been fully taken in by this government and their culture wars and by the media and its vitriol. They don't remind you of the fact that they've decimated the police force. You've literally just snapped my head out of it. I'm truly sorry. Apology accepted, Mark. There is no point having a mind if you never change it. Are we going to have to talk about your Uncle Keith again? Or are you prepared to tell me, like Mark in Sheffield is, that until you gave your head a wobble, and I like to think of this programme as an unofficial head-wobbling emergency service, you were falling for this absolute nonsense that crime figures had anything at all to do with, for example, a few police officers in Lincolnshire who had the job that day of policing a pride event
in many ways, the fact that they can do the Macarena is fantastic because it means that there aren't any homophobic protesters trying to trip over the marchers or hurl abuse at the attendees. I mean, if I don't think I've been ungenerous. I'm not saying that you are stupid. I'm saying you have fallen for something and it was a stupid thing to do. Could you tell me how it happens? Could you tell me how anybody with an IQ in double figures could possibly conclude that crime figures in a country that has seen its police service more than decimated, if you want to get pedantic and technical about it, a reduction of a fifth is more than a reduction of a tenth, which is literally what decimate means. How anybody in a country whose police service has been double decimated and whose criminal justice system, whose court system has been completely kebabbed, can be successfully persuaded that the problem caused by those two phenomena are actually caused by, quotes, woke policing, end quotes. What does it mean? 03456060973. All right, I'll give you a theory. I think we just touched on it by accident with the last caller. I think woke policing is attending events that are anti-racist, or it's just attending. That's the problem. It's not, you never see complaints about the police doing the hokey cokey at a St. George's Day parade. You only ever see complaints about the police dancing at the Notting Hill Carnival or sitting down or not sitting down or not being violent enough at an Extinction Rebellion protest or doing the Macarena at a Pride festival. So environmental campaigners, gay pride marchers, anti-racist protesters. If the police do something there, then that's woke policing. But if the same police do the same thing at, for example, a Countryside Alliance march or a St. George's Day parade, then it's not woke. Which is why you won't ring me and tell me what woke policing is, because you know that eventually I'll lead you to that point and we'll see exactly what you are. Unless, like Mark in Sheffield, you've got the honesty and the decency to stare at yourself in the mirror and actually adjust your hair slightly and think, oh, crikey, I don't like the look of that. I'm going to make some changes. I'm looking at the man in the mirror. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Emma is in Newport. Emma, what's going on?
I genuinely believe that the people who believe in believe in the whole idea of woke policing, part of the, it's delusional nostalgia. So they look back at the old police style and see, they were rough and ready.
With the gays and the people of colour, they wouldn't
with
want.
Anyone.
Not with anyone, because this wouldn't happen at a St. George's Day. I see what you mean. You mean a clip around the ear and a little bit of mild abuse never did me any harm.
Yeah, and right. The criminals were gentlemen criminals. The craze.
Leave your door open in those days. Yes.
Yeah, or they'd knock before they burgled, and some of that is from the television. Reminding people in a delusional way that that's how it was. But also, I was at a police museum in Manchester, which is run by a lot of ex-police, and they were saying about how the police used to be, and how they've come, and how far they've come, but how people will react and say, oh, well, back in my day, and they try and explain, no, it isn't like that. And they'll explain to the kids, when they do something wrong, they get the birch. And how, one, it never made any difference anyway. Two...
Well, it actually did. I mean, it embedded recidivism. So there's a touch of the hang'em and the flogg'ems here.
Yeah.
Okay, the bit that doesn't fit, the bit that, because of the word woke, they're never woke if they are... if they're joining in the festivities at a if they have a slice of cake at a Women's Institute event, or they join in the conga at a St. George's Day festival, that's not woke. Why is that not woke?
No, I think they'd be woke if it was a Women's Institute event.
I don't.
Because, only...
I don't know if Women's Institute events... I don't know if Women's Institute events need policing. Do they get quite fisticuffs over those chocolate cakes sometimes? No, it's my chutney recipe. Emma's stolen my chutney. Call the police, call the cops. Maybe. You're right. Of course you're right. That nostalgia for a time that never existed, which leads us back to the blimmin' B word, doesn't it? And that idea of, if only it wasn't for all this progress and modernity. You know what they're saying now, Emma, don't you?
button that's like, oh, this is how it used to be, this is how it should be, Bobby on the beat. But the Bobby on the beat would have a cup of tea with you.
That's woke.
They'd have
That's
a chat
woke.
with you.
Probably green tea. It was probably chamomile tea. That's woke. That's woke. And they're saying now, I've seen a little bit of this. I don't know whether it's percolated through to the shill client journalists yet, but I don't know what they're complaining about. We always had ice on the inside of the windows when I was growing up. All they've got to do is wear an extra jumper. It's just bizarre, actually. I don't know that I've ever really got my head fully around it. I don't think it pops up in either of my books when I've tried to unravel these positions that people have been led to. And that's the crucial point. They've been led to. Nobody wakes up this stupid and thinks, oh, yes, that burglary over the road's not being investigated because some police officers in Lincolnshire did the Macarena while their job was to be at the event that they were attending. Their job was not to be in Bognor Regis solving a burglary. That's the point. You're led to it. 10:57 is the time. Thank you, Emma. Kathy's in Redruth in Cornwall. Kathy, what would you like to say?
Well, I think you've probably touched on it already. The crime figures the unsolved crimes are absolutely being caused by woke policing, because if our police weren't wasting their time investigating racial crime or homophobic or trans crime, or even, dare I say it, crime against women, things that weren't crimes, say, 50 years ago, then they'd have time to sort out the burglary against that nice, important, white, male, Anglo-Saxon conservative voter.
Yeah, I mean, for the purposes of the tape, your sarcasm is absolutely splendid, but some people may need me to stress that it is actually sarcasm.
I'm sorry, you don't like me being sarcastic.
I love it, but and this isn't quite as unnuanced as Twitter, but it probably needs a little bit there might be some radio phone-in programs in this country where people would ring in with these opinions. I think Sangeeta spoke to one of them on Sunday. People would ring in with these opinions, not being sarcastic. But do you think, you exaggerate as well, slightly, a touch of hyperbole, but that must be part of it, mustn't it? That's the subtext. That's the St. George's Day conundrum solved. Why is it not woke to do the hokey cokey at a St. George's Day festival, but it is woke to do the Macarena at a gay pride festival? We're spending too much time bending over backwards to accommodate these gays and these people of colour and these women as well, as I guess, as we saw with Sarah Everard, with the vigil.
Absolutely.
With the vigil.
Absolutely. I was at the Pride event in Truro on Saturday.
Oh, yes. Did you do the Macarena?
I hope he's not listening. I did not. Actually, there was plenty of dancing going on, but I was running a stand, so I didn't have much chance for
Fantastic.
it. But I was actually approached. I hope he's not listening, but I was approached by a gentleman who informed me that the current problem with the NHS is because of all the immigrants taking the NHS services away.
Yes.
And he waved his hands in the air and said, and now we've got these Ukrainians.
He sounds
now,
nice.
I don't know how many Ukrainians there are in Cornwall. I'd be surprised if it made it into treble figures.
Isn't it just?
That is not what's causing the problem you probably know.
I tell you what,
Cornwall's NHS is famous for its ambulance queues. That's not caused by dare I say it, the people who used to work for the NHS and have gone away because we made them feel so unwelcome.
You know that, and I know that.
But picture. It's too many people.
And that's who's electing the next Prime Minister. Whether or not he is a fully paid-up member of the Conservative Party or not, he is very much of that ilk.
Yes, but it's that sense. There's too many of us, and the services should be going to...
Me.
In Cornwall, me.
Yeah, me.
To me.
Me.
People like me. To one away.
If you've lived a life of privilege, as a very clever caller said to me a few months or years ago, then equality feels like oppression, and that's what you're describing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
These people feel oppressed. Why are the police at a pride festival? They should be at my real ale festival or something like that.
And they should be at my real ale festival, and they should be investigating the crime against my grandma, which absolutely should be being investigated. I don't dispute that.
No, nor do I.
But the problem is that there's not enough to go round, so the police are having to prioritise, and I disagree with their priorities. And that's the woke watch bit.
Well, there you go. If you'd brought that in 10 seconds earlier, you could have had a sting. You could have had a woke watch sting. Whoa! She got a woke. Wow, Keith pressing two buttons at once. He'll be after a pay rise next. It's 11 o'clock. Thank you, Kathy. Lovely stuff. May take a tiny bit more on this. I don't know. I find it fascinating, and it moves us into slightly new territory. Kathy's contribution does, because protecting the status quo. You don't have to be a white Anglo-Saxon straight male to protect the status quo. We saw it in the early stages of the Conservative leadership election. You can be a woman of colour, but if you're dedicated to protecting the profoundly unequal status quo by, for example, denying racism, then some of these people, some of these porky characters are going to love you. 4 minutes after 11. I'm going to take this one up to 1:15, I think. I've got some texts I want to read, some rather good texts, including one that I thought was from Idiot's Corner, but actually on reflection and thinking back to people getting in touch to say that they have successfully given their head a wobble this morning and have concluded that the whole notion of woke policing is a complete confection designed to distract from the consequences of 12 years of Tory government. And bizarrely, the people trying to sell you woke policing are exactly the same people that have sold you 12 years of Tory government. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. So, Pete in Stamford, just got a last-minute reprieve there. I don't think your text is going to come from Idiot's Corner, which means I need to find one that has come from Idiot's Corner. So we'll have this one. Dear at Mr. James O.B., why won't you talk about or even mention trans people? You mean apart from Kat in Bristol, the trans woman who rang in 20 minutes ago to talk about her experiences and opinions with regard to policing? Should we get a sting for Idiot's Corner, or would we be overdoing the stings? Can you oversting stings? Can you oversting? We would be overstinging things. We'd be overstinging things if we had a sting for Idiot's Corner. All right. You sure you're not just avoiding a bit of heavy lifting there? I like stings. And a lot of you pointing out I missed a trick with the wokey-cokey. Indeed I did. And the answer to the question of why it is only certain types of events that seem to permit woke policing is getting close to an answer. So this doesn't go into Idiot's Corner, Pete, because I think you are, although profoundly wrong, I think your question is good in good faith and it's quite politely phrased. James, when have you ever seen a St. George's Day parade in this country? It wouldn't be allowed for being seen as racist. And if one did go ahead, why would it need policing? I don't think policing is woke because that's a title created by the papers, but there is a problem with the way they operate, which we only draw from our own experiences. We don't need the media to tell us that they don't do their job properly. Pete, to begin at the beginning, of course there are St. George's Day parades and St. George's Day festivals. There's one about 500 yards from the seat that I am currently sitting in every year in April. It features feasting to reflect the 13th century origins of St. George's Day. There's even Morris dancing, mate. There's all sorts of fun and games going on. There's medieval jousting. It's in Trafalgar Square. I can't remember whether it was introduced by Sadiq Khan or one of his predecessors, but the St. George's Day feast in Trafalgar Square every year is a thing to behold. To take the second point of your text, you need to have policing whenever there is an organised gathering in excess of a specified number of people. For obvious reasons, mate. You've got transport issues, you've got health and safety issues, you've got a higher likelihood of crime when you have a higher congregation of people. So everything from the Countryside Alliance March to a Black Lives Matter protest to an EDL collection or an EDL, everything needs to, even if you had a Morris dancing jamboree. If there were a sufficient number of Morris dancers there, then you would have to have policing. So because you're so profoundly wrong about the first 2 points, the necessity of policing at public events and the absence of St. George's Day celebrations anywhere in this country because it would be called racist, I hope, mate, you'll take a moment to think whether you're completely wrong about everything else as well. For example, the idea that the police aren't doing their job properly because of what the newspapers have called woke. Because you are, Pete, completely and utterly wrong. And if you can be so wrong about there being no St. George's Day parades allowed or no need for police officers at public gatherings, then obviously you can be completely wrong about policing in general as well. You're welcome. 8 after 11 is the time. Jarlath is in Birmingham. Jarlath, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Thank you very much for taking my call, especially after the news at 11. You normally move on to second.
It's a big compliment there, isn't it? Hey, pressure's on now.
Very, very big. I actually work for West Midlands Police. I leave in a couple of weeks, mainly because of said budget cuts. I've decided to move my role.
Right.
But it was quite interesting that your previous caller was talking about protecting the status quo, and I think that's absolutely bob on because we had the Commonwealth Games recently in Birmingham and across the West Midlands.
And indeed you did. Thank you for looking after my sister so well. She had a splendid time.
I'm very glad that we did. I'm very glad that we could help. But the point is that obviously the royal family, I think, is very much a status quo, and a lot of the media in this country do like the royal family, and things like this Commonwealth Games do enjoy. It is a very much a royal family-esque thing, and it's protecting the status quo. And we saw a lot of positive comments from people in and around Birmingham and the West Midlands, saying, it was great that you were, talking with people, having photos with kids and all the rest of it. There wasn't any comments of.
There's nothing woke about that when you're mixing with the attendees at the Commonwealth Games. It's only woke when you're doing it at a Pride event or a Black Lives Matter protest.
Exactly this.
Oh boy.
Exactly this.
Oh boy.
Some of the comments that we had, in particular on our social platforms when we're talking about policing Birmingham Pride and everything else, are abhorrent and disgusting. And it is that sort of keeping the status quo. It doesn't matter that you're doing it for the Commonwealth Games, because it's going to be a massive thing and everyone's going to be involved in it and joyous, and it's a thing for the region, even though it's a massive thing for the royal family. But you can't bash the royal family because that's against the status quo.
Well, not even the royal family. I mean, even if the royal family weren't there, it's just a massive gathering that needs policing. Yeah. But if the police officers behave in a slightly more relaxed or approachable manner, then no one's going to give them a kicking for being woke, because it's not an event that is attended chiefly by people from certain parts of our population. It's so obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, we had just very, very quickly. We had there was a video that went around on TikTok, I believe, of an officer dancing towards in the closing ceremony or the opening ceremony, outside, waiting for people to come in and out of. And honestly, I didn't see a single person going, why isn't she investigating our burglary? Why isn't she investigating my robbery? So everyone was enjoying it and having a good time.
That's a great one.
Personally, I don't understand the difference. I really don't.
You do now. Okay. I do now. I didn't before. I did. I mean, it's been it's merged, hasn't it? Like a sort of, I don't know, like a thunderbird. One of the thunderbirds coming out of the sea, whichever the thunderbird that was. I'm going to get 100 texts now telling me which thunderbird it was.
I was a bit too young for thunderbirds, I'm afraid. James,
all right, like a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis. The answer is really, really clear. It's really ugly. Anyone who talks about woke policing at a gay pride event and doesn't talk about woke policing at a Commonwealth events ceremony, when both officers in both cases are merely dancing in a peaceful and peaceable scenario, then they are essentially encouraging homophobia or racism or whatever it is that the event where woke policing took place was celebrating or commemorating. That doesn't happen as clearly as this that often, Jarlath. This is an absolute humdinger, isn't it? Stone cold clarity on this one now.
Well, I'm glad that Cassie made the point beforehand, and I just basically copied onto the back of it. So I don't want to take all the credit.
No, it's not. I'm not giving you all the credit, you cheeky beggar. This is the culmination. I'd squeeze in one more call, actually, but this is the culmination, and there it is. So don't even go for the St. George's Day theory. Look at the Commonwealth opening or closing festivals, and a police officer gets caught having a bit of a jig, having a bit of a boogie there. Why is that not woke? Should we get a tumbleweed sound effect? Should we get a... No? Okay. I've got a thing for this, because Nick Abbott is the don in this game. Nick Abbott's use of sound effects is up there with Kenny Everett. I mean, it is just beautiful to behold. But the point is, know your place, O'Brien, is what Keith is thinking. You're never going to be Nick Abbott, so just step away from the sound effects, all right? You've got your sound, you've got your woke watch thing, you've got your mystery hour stuff, you've got a bed and whatever they're called. So, no, you cannot have I wanted a penny drop sound effect at one point. That would have been... No. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. Jarlath, thank you. Reece is in Huddersfield with what will probably be the last word on this. Reece, what would you like to say?
Hello. I just wanted to discuss with you the actual etymology of the term woke. Do you know where it comes from?
Well, yeah, I do. We have done this quite a few times. You mean being alive to social injustice?
Yeah, but it wasn't originally just the social injustice. It came about as part of the conspiracy theory movement in the early 2000s in association with 9/11 and all that stuff that went along with that. But the term woke originally meant to be awake, to be aware of the issues, to be...
Well, it didn't, did it? I mean, it originally meant not to sleep. It depends how far back you want to go. But in the context of current culture wars, the word woke essentially means anti-racist, and anti-woke means anti-racist. That's how I see it. Although, obviously, when you're talking about pride events, it's not racism, it's homophobia that is being tacitly encouraged.
But this whole tactic of labelling different groups of society, different sections, is been used since the Romans. I mean, it's divide and conquer.
Yes.
Because if you're looking at the person next to you, wondering if his agenda or his motives are different from your own, you're not actually looking up at the people that are controlling our society. And our society is controlled by economic extremists.
It is now. It's worse than it's ever been. It's worse than it's ever been, isn't it? And it's happened like a frog boiling exercise, Reece.
It's a cult of finance is exactly what it is. It's the ideolatry of money. And that's what we've essentially come to.
And if you don't think that the newspaper ecosystem has skewed the playing,
exactly.
if you don't think it's skewed the playing field enough, then you can fund a secretly funded think tank or even start your own television station.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's basically, if you have money, you have power because you have a voice. You can basically manipulate and control.
Briefly, Reece, why do so many people fall for it so easily?
Well, because people look for information that already confirms what they already believe. It's called confirmation bias. Essentially, the British public is intellectually lazy, and it's.
You sound like Liz Truss now, mate.
Well, what's going to happen is they're going to feed their appetite
but what
for
threat is being
with information
fed
that confirms what they already think.
What threat is being fed? What feeling is being fed by a few officers in Lincolnshire doing the Macarena? If I, for example, live in Huddersfield, actually that's not far enough away. If I live in Cornwall, what prejudice is being fed? What do you see what I mean? Why am I going to be inflamed by that?
Well, because small-minded people that don't essentially are too lazy to look up the facts in the first place are more likely to cotton on to, this is further evidence of why my grandmother's burglary didn't get investigated because there's somebody dancing the Macarena in Lincoln.
It's just a shortage of thinking, as with so much.
It's laziness.
Yeah.
It's laziness. People...
And we're all lazy. We're all lazy in different ways, and we all find other people...
need to be woke, though, James.
Well, I know that, and you know that. And woke is the opposite of lazy in a way, isn't it? I mean, almost literally. Thank you, Reece. I know you're on hold for a very long time, so I'm grateful to you for hanging on. 11:16 is the time. Right, up next, in case you thought that wasn't controversial enough, we're going to start talking about Shamima Begum, the schoolgirl who was groomed online by some of the nastiest characters ever to inhabit the planet. And the latest chapter in this story beggars belief. And again, you know how it works, this programme. There's no point having a mind if you never change it. But if this doesn't prompt at least some sort of rethink about the withdrawal of her British citizenship by Sajid Javid, then nothing will. 11:19 is the time. My thanks to George, who has dug out a photo of St George's Day celebration in Gravesend in 2013, and 3 young female police officers waving St George's flags. And as he points out, no one ever called that woke, and nor would they, mate, because I'll tell you what, anyone paying attention to the last hour and 15 minutes of radio could not fail to conclude that policing is only woke when it happens at events that celebrate equality or condemn equality. It's funny that, isn't it? And to go back to the beginning, get back to basics, woke police told. In other words, down with equality, up with inequality. And it's something I think I want to explain to you, because it's only really clicked for me in the last couple of weeks, or maybe the last couple of months. I touched on it a minute ago with the Conservative leadership campaign, because, you know, people like to say, oh, well, how come the Tories have had 3 prime ministers, 3 female prime ministers, or how come they've got so many members of ethnic minorities in their cabinet if they uphold an unequal status quo, or if they are, you know, the champions of racism or misogyny. And it took me a while to understand this, and I needed your help. But it's all about the system, not the individual. So something quite profound shifted in my understanding of our country when Downing Street released that ludicrous report claiming that there was no systemic racism in the United Kingdom, something that is so obviously at odds with observable reality that you sort of wonder whether perhaps it's you that needs to give your head a wobble. We're not the most racist country in the world, but the idea that there isn't any systemic racism is just ridiculous. But of course, it's not the white cabinet ministers who are sent out to champion and promote that. It's the cabinet ministers of colour, which makes you as a white commentator a little bit wary of criticising it, which is, again, calculation. They know that this is what's going to happen. So what you need to appreciate is the difference between the system and the individual. So if you are a beneficiary of an unequal system and a member of a community that is historically or traditionally a victim of an unequal system comes along to defend the unequal system, you are going to bite their arm off, you know? A gay man who writes in the Daily Mail about how we spend too much time bending over backwards to accommodate gay rights is manna from heaven for these bigots. A black man who will write in the Daily Mail about how we spend too much time bending over backwards to accommodate Black Lives Matter protests or Black Lives Matter issues. It's manna from heaven. When a black footballer comes forward to say, I don't like the Black Lives Matter kneeling because I think it actually distracts from the bigger issues and it means that we're not concentrating on actual measurable substantive change, it appears in the right-wing newspapers as, a black man doesn't like the Black Lives Matter taking the knee. So it's taken me a while to get there, and I've been meaning to share that with you for a while because it is quite difficult sometimes to find the confidence to counter these very deliberate conservative attack lines that are supposed to insulate them from accusations of what they obviously are. You know, the party that comes up with the Rwanda policy, which we'll talk about shortly, is clearly a party committed to stoking the very, very worst flames of bigotry and racial prejudice. But of course, if it's a Home Secretary of Asian heritage who's doing it, they think that they're golden. They think that they're insulated from accusations of racism. But, you know, you even have candidates standing for far-right parties who are from ethnic minorities. I think Priti Patel's dad was a UKIP candidate, wasn't he? It's exactly the same process. And that's the end of my TED Talk. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Right, okay, this one's tricky. Why is it tricky? It's tricky, and one of the reasons why you won't be hearing or reading much about this story in newspapers that have previously had very strong, or indeed TV and radio programs that have previously had very, very strong and pungent editorial lines to take upon the plight or the story of Shamima Begum.
Sương đêm mộng trắng, mùa hoa tuyết nở, giữa xa